5:30 being here, we'll go ahead and officially call the meeting to order. Has the meeting been properly posted and the roll been taken? Thank you. Item number 2 is the approval of the minutes. Item 2.1 is minutes of May 4th, 2020. If there's no additions or corrections, I'd go ahead and entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Make a motion to approve them.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item number 3 is communications. Do we have any communications? Okay. Item number 4 is public hearing to review and possible recommendation regarding the Jiffy Lube. I think we have Kurt, or do we? Jason and Kurt? Okay. So I would entertain a motion to reopen the public hearing at this time.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to reopen signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Mark, who wanted to start us off on this one?
Yeah, so the Jiffy Lube is ready to go over near the Aldi site. F&F Tire. Aldi's. Looking for approval tonight from us. Oil changes, obviously. And are there any specific questions? Okay. Any questions that we had from Jason?
Any questions? Will?
We're pretty sure that in all ways this conforms with all city zoning requirements.
Yes. And this was the one where we had the meetings before where they moved their building and repositioned things. I think all of you guys were at that meeting, right? Or was that last board?
It was the last one, yeah.
So not all of you, I guess, were a part of that, but they.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, you were. Okay.
Yep.
So that's a goal. They're not interfering with the Walmart thing at all, and this isn't going to get half built, and Walmart's going to shut them down, and we're going to have half built building. And
I know that the burden was put on them with their attorneys to figure all of that out, and from what I've been told, there isn't any issues with it. But I don't know if Jason has anything to add to that, but I know that they kind of did all of the research on that aspect of it.
I'll defer to Kurt on that one. Kurt, do you have anything to add regarding the agreement between Walmart and Jiffy Lube?
The only thing, I guess, really say is the reason we moved south farther east, there's a use restriction line within the ECR for the development. And by locating the Jiffy Lube building where it is, we are still negotiating with the same seller, and we are outside of that use restriction area with Walmart.
and this is confirmed with Walmart.
Yes.
Any other questions for T or for Jason or Kurt?
I have one question. Oh, sure. So, Kurt, to clarify that, you have an agreement to purchase the land pending approval of this conditional use?
That's part of we have to get the building permit. We've done all of our due diligence. We're now down to getting the CUP. We need the use approval. then we need to get our building permit as well.
But I was asking specifically about the real estate purchase agreement.
Yes.
The land is under contract?
We won't, until we get the CUP approval on the building.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions at this time or comments? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and I would entertain a motion one way or another. Anyone care to make a motion?
So we've, excuse me, Ryan.
Yeah.
So that, just to go through the history of this parcel, excuse me, of this project one more time. We approved this project on the, what now is the lot next door with the previous plan commission. Effectively, the development is the same development, except it is moved to this new subdivided lot, which we approved the subdivision of the last time. And then the plan for this building has been flipped and accommodates the new lot and all its access. So even though I was opposed to the subdivision last time, I'd move that we recommend to the Common Council this conditional use permit with all of its outlined points as identified in the agenda summary provided to us.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right, moving on to item number 5 then, at this point, would be the public hearing to review and possibly recommend Brian Nichols and Matthew Shepard.
Mr.
Is-
Mayor, is that Brianna Nichols?
Oh, what did I say? I'm sorry. What? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Clearly, I don't have my readers on. I'm sorry. I turned 46 and my eyesight has, so I apologize for that. At this time, I would entertain a motion to reopen the public hearing from was it January 13th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. T, are you taking this one too?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So Brianna and Matt are in the audience today. So some of you weren't here on this one, so I'll just give a little history. There's a fence at 1108 Cottonwood. When I issued the permit, I put some restrictions on it because there's a street yard. In your street yard, you can only be 4 foot tall, 50% opaque. And Matt and Brianna had contacted Lowe's, and Lowe's were the people that put the fence up, and they weren't aware of the conditions that I put on the.
Excuse me. Because this is a confusing process,
Sure.
instead of pronouns, let's use proper nouns. Who's the they who were confused? Lowe's?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, I'll try to be more specific here, but, so Brianna and Matt were not aware that there were some restrictions on that permit. Lowe's installed the fence, it wasn't installed according to code, and so now they had a fence that did not meet, all of my codes, so I wasn't able to pass it. And so they kind of went back, Brianna and Matt went back and forth with Lowe's. It took quite a bit of time because who Lowe's hired was out of state. So basically, that's why we're here today. The street at 1108 Cottonwood, there's an adjoining street that goes straight through their backyard where the lights kind of shine into their house, so that's why they were wanting to have that 6-foot privacy fence. So we did, this kind of brings us up to date.
Can we go back though? Because you said I was on when we did this originally.
Sure.
The fence they replaced, did we find out for sure if the fence that they replaced was a 6-foot fence or not? I know that was some
So there was a
discussion.
fence that was there before that was taken down. It was a 6-foot fence. There's currently next door to them, a 6-foot fence that was there. It was built a long time ago. I don't believe there was any, building permits at that time. It was a legal non-conforming fence at the time. And then they basically took that fence down, and within a week, 3 days, another fence went up.
Okay, I think that's important to
Sure,
mention.
yep.
That they just basically replaced the 6-foot fence that was already there, and the neighbor still has a 6-foot fence.
There is still a
And
6-foot
it's-
fence
it
there,
looks
and
It's off.
similar.
Yeah, but it's
Can I,
outside.
can I ask one question concerning that, though? Because we've been back and forth on this thing for near on a year, and I
Right.
apologize to you folks, but it got kicked back to us once more. But the new document that was provided in this agenda packet suggests that in 2018, at the point when you purchased the property, that the city in the in the title request documents that came from a title search company responded with a real estate status report dated June 1st, of 18, which noted, and under Mark's signature, the property is subject to platted restriction for the full Creek Road frontage with a 25-foot building setback, which isn't relevant to our conversation today, but a 6-foot tall fence along Creek Road is non-conforming. So prior to the purchase of the home, there was a notice by the city that the fence was non-conforming. Did the title company inform the buyers of that non-conforming status?
I can tell you were not told anything about the fence. We found out when T sent us the letter saying our fence is bad. And that he sent correspondence before. We never received any correspondence.
Right.
We didn't know anything about it until,
Can I ask you a simple question about this fence? And
Sure.
I'm so,
I know it's a fence.
so what was wrong with the old fence?
It was starting to fall apart. It was
Okay.
tattering.
So it was a repair.
Yes,
yeah. Okay.
we wanted to have a better fence.
Why did you guys build it with access gate to the walk and a 10-foot gate to the concrete pad in the back?
We followed the exact how it was
Yeah.
already.
That was how it was.
That
So
was-
it was constructed non-compliantly, and you were determined
We didn't know-
ignorantly to
Yes.
follow its non-compliance, right?
I did walk with the guy from Lowe's when he came to the house to walk everything, and walked it all, and he's like, well, we can do the same opening here, the same opening there, everything the same. I said, okay, great, fine, and
Okay.
let's do this.
So let me, what other solutions have you, so let me ask a technical question of T or Mark, since you both are referenced in this thing. So the proper noun for this yard is a street? Is a street, lawn, street yard?
It's a street yard setback.
Okay, so, that what is the requirement on the 6-foot privacy fences on the yard sides? So,
If you're not in a street yard, so if you are beyond the.
but this is in a street yard.
Correct.
So in a street yard, you've gotta go back to the building setback plus, no, a certain feet, cause I did this permit for the side of our yard, right?
It's 25 feet back.
So,
Once you
so-
get 25 foot
so,
back, you can.
so to get this completely compliant, this fence would have to be 4 foot across the back, 50 foot compliant, 50% opaque, right? And 25 feet back on the sides, right? 50% opaque, right? Okay.
And then there is a thing in here where you can make it so that you go 8 foot back, then have the landscaping and.
Right, okay. And those solutions don't work for what reason? We just don't want, we want to avoid the cost where it's,
We would lose 8 feet of our backyard. We have a dog that runs around, that's our yard. We also,
There's like I'm sorry, cement slabs, I
okay,
guess. to
but
pre-
you wouldn't lose it, right? Because 2
Backyard
doors
part.
down, right, I assume, two doors to your west, right? Somebody has a chain link fence at 4 feet high at the same, I guess, that's north and south, latitude, as your fence. So you don't lose the yard, what you lose is the privacy.
that as well, and then the lights, when cars are driving through, go into our house.
Yeah, but, okay. What you're writing is a policy that would allow anybody on Creek Road to have a privacy fence, which the General Operations Committee chose not to do.
Understand, I'm not trying to
Yeah,
write any policy.
right.
I'm
I'm just trying to find
I'm
a
just-
solution to this.
I think the argument,
what we went with.
So
We bought a
the
house-
real only justification for this situation is that it is a more functional replacement for a non-compliant fence, right?
because I made the argument, Kevin, last time about if they would replace this thing 1 or 2 panels at a time, if
Yeah.
it would still, and the answer was yes, correct? They would have been able, we'd never be here?
Right. And we would never be here if we had a city policy too, that when we notice a non-compliance at the point of a property transfer, we insist that the buyer is informed of a non-compliant condition and is issued a cure provision within X dates, right? Because then they would have been notified. Because Mark took the proper course in 2018, said this was a non-compliant. We weren't at the closing. We're going to say that they weren't informed, right? And so, and it would appear that if we have, and we're going to spend a whole lot of time in a little bit talking about development standards, right? So one of the ways to this, and this isn't you guys, okay? One of the ways to deal with these situations going forward is to say, if we find a non-compliant situation at a property transfer, the city has a right of interest to ensure that a property becomes compliant.
Kevin, weren't they notified, in fact, that it was non-compliant?
The document would have been transmitted from Mark to the closing people. Right, so the real estate status report for the city of Delavan was a request by the Chicago Title or whoever, right? Do they have any outstanding taxes that there's a lien against, all that kind of stuff, right? So we don't know if Chicago Title told them there was a non-compliance.
However, that document would have been made available at the closing, would it not?
We had no document.
I don't know.
That everything was non-compliant.
Mark, are you aware whether or not this had been provided to them?
The real estate status reports are processed through the clerk's office or through the, who actually sends them out? Is it Kelly? Lisa, okay. Deputy clerk's office. They're routed through the office as you see with the various departments.
Right.
And they are provided to the title company.
Right. So the title company would say there's no outstanding taxes. There's no liens. I know they would say that much, because they would worry about collecting the money. right? But they wouldn't necessarily say, they might say you should be aware that your property has a fence on your neighbor's yard.
So how can we, sorry, are you,
Yeah.
okay, how can we fix this problem for them? Is there a way that we can allow them to keep this fence?
What?
And how would they do that? Is that
So
through
they-
us, or do they have to go to zoning and appeals?
So they went to, so if I understand this, and so you mind if we talk through you?
No,
Because
go
we've
ahead.
had- This has been a year. So
I know
we've
we're-
gone
we're a
through
little
this,
ahead of
right?
it.
And
Just-
we've said, and so at the last meeting, we suggested to the General Operations Committee, and I wasn't there, you were, that they go back and consider amending the ordinance concerning street lots. The General Operations Committee said, we don't want to do that. So we're left with exception decision,
Oh, okay.
right? So my question is, on what basis do we make this exception that Creek Road doesn't become an 8-foot privacy fence zone, right? And so, because the consequence of making a conditional use is that you have to stand up for that exception, that it's a special circumstance in an environment like this, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, because the General Operations Committee, who's writing the policy with the Common Council, has said they don't want a general policy that says
Which makes sense,
Creek
okay.
Road should be there.
So we're just
So-
looking at doing a possible exception for
Right.
them at this point in time.
The conditional use identifies what variation you can give, or what exception you can give, and that is the 8-foot setback and the landscaping. So it's not open-ended, it's not whatever you want to approve. It is, and Mike Slavny is, I don't know if he's available, but he can comment on that, but the ordinance is clear if they can seek a conditional use, and the conditional use will allow for a 6-foot fence that is 50%, but it has to still be 50% open. It has to be set back to provide for landscaping, and our planner has indicated that would be his minimum that he would recommend is 8 feet. So that's by the ordinance establishes that criteria for the conditional use.
So my point, Denise, was this, right? We still have to have a reason to give them a conditional use that stands up against why they got a conditional use and somebody 3 properties down the road has to live by the ordinance, right?
So really in a conditional use that if they're able to meet those guidelines of that conditional use, and that it really, then they should be able to get it. So if they're setting it back 8 feet and unless you have a specific, a real reason that's going to create a safety concern, my understanding is that if they follow it, but they would have to move the fence and they would have to make it 50%.
Okay, so hold on.
Just one quick question, I'm sorry. Then why are they even here? Because
So-
this has happened before, where people have come before the planning commission for us to make a decision on something. If it's supposedly black and white in an ordinance, then they shouldn't be here at all.
So does
That's where I stand.
No, but right now, they would not be allowed to do that. They will only be allowed the 4-foot fence at this point under the code. To be the higher fence, they can seek a conditional use. And so they have made application for the conditional use, which would allow them, if they construct it per the standards that are established in the ordinance, that means that they would have to construct it at 8 foot back, and they would have to continue to keep it 50% open and provide for landscaping in front of the fence.
Okay, I want to tag team there with my friend. Is that all right? Yep. Okay. So that would mean that basically anyone in the city of Delavan, based on what you just said to us, anybody in the city of Delavan with a street lot who is willing to build a 6-foot fence, 50% opaque, 8 feet back from the sidewalk with landscaping in front of it, we should be granting conditional uses to?
I don't think that's exactly what.
Well, no, that's what she said.
That's what she said, it is.
She said that
No.
this would be a reason for making an exception, and that would be based off of this particular incident in this particular way in how this happened. Now, as I understand it, we sent out building permits, and they were followed, except the installer did not install them according to the building permits. Is that correct? So, in that case, that's an installation failure.
No, it's not. It's a design failure.
No,
They
it's an
bought the
installation
fence
failure.
from Lowe's
If
based
the
on
inst-
its design,
the
and
installation,
Lowe's,
the
no,
inst- excuse
no, it's
me,
not an
I'm still,
installation failure.
I'm still finishing. The installation failure was based off of the information provided by code. Was it not?
Right, it did not meet the code. They did not follow the notes that were on the permit.
So in this case, the homeowner was responsible, the building permit was issued, and the installer failed. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of the homeowner because they hired the installer. Ultimately, they went through Lowe's. So now the question before us is who's held accountable? Lowe's, the installer? We can't oversee that. So we look at the owner. That's how I'm interpreting this.
So, yeah, I appreciate that perspective. My point is, to make an exception, you're justifying future exceptions.
I agree with the precedent set.
And it is not an exception, it's a conditional use.
And my point
So-
is, conditional uses are made conditional for a reason, right?
And
Go ahead, Mark.
I guess I think the petitioner has already stated that one of the reasons that they would like this taller fence and the request for the conditional use is the headlights from the roadway that comes directly in from the south.
So this is a picture of their backyard. Do you guys live in the basement?
We do, yeah.
Yeah. So the lights are gonna come in the second floor, no matter what, right? Here's a picture of the whole street. The only people who have a problem with the lights are the people who have the non-compliant fences, apparently, because they're the only two fences along the whole street that are non-compliant. And
That's
there's
because-
only one other fence.
There's that side street right there where the cars come and point right at their house.
yes, there's a street that comes up, I just looked at it on Google
Yeah,
Maps. It
Westbury, I
comes-
think.
Yeah,
Westbury Lane? Is it?
yeah, it comes right up into there, and I can tell where it would shine into their house.
And there is nothing, they could put a 4-foot chain link, with I think what Kevin was talking about, they could put landscaping in their yard to create to address the light shining. So there are options for them to do a compliant fence and still address.
Can I ask a
their
technical question on the conditional use? Just because this might make this a lot faster. The conditional use you suggested, Denise, is not the fence that they have up.
Correct.
Okay, so 8 feet back from the fence line they have now,
8 feet back from their property line.
okay? Is the fence on the property line now? Okay.
A foot.
And so the conditional use that you just proposed is 8 feet back from the fence they have now with half of the boards removed. Is that what you guys are applying for?
No,
Oh, okay.
Well, we applied for the conditional use because that's what we were told we needed to do. We didn't, pardon our ignorance, but we didn't know what to do.
I think you guys just want to be able to keep the fence. Because it's a huge expense to have to move it, because Lowe's isn't gonna pay for it to be moved. Who actually got the building permit? Did you go through Lowe's to get the because sometimes when you go through a builder, the builder actually gets the building permit.
And they said they'll get the permit.
They got the building permit.
Now we have
So
a
you
building
guys,
chain.
that's what I'm thinking. So you
Magic
guys never
Fence
got the
was
building
the-
permit.
Magic Fence pulled the permit, and they were the ones that were hired by the.
Okay, because I was wondering that, because a lot of times, the people that put it up. I honestly, I wanna allow them to have it, and I think that's part of being on a planning commission, is to be able to make changes to things, and we've done that before with things that weren't per the ordinance, as long as we have a good reason for it. I mean, it's gonna end up going to the common council anyway, I believe, for final decision or no?
Right.
Well,
Their pain is not over.
should we be talking a magic fence? Because they pulled it, ultimately they're responsible for installing it? Is that
I think
appropriate?
you've tried, right? You've tried getting hold of them?
We've been trying to get a hold of Lowe's, and Lowe's keeps, jumping and diving, and then
Have you tried getting a hold of Magic Fence?
they've called me once, right after, ET sent them, or Lowe's contacted Lowe's, and Lowe's contacted them. They said that all we needed to do was apply for a permit or a special condition or something, and then it'll be okay.
Yeah, that's all they got once, it'll be fine.
And that-
Your
that was
grandfather
all
in was what
great.
they said.
It was all just like the installer told me when they called me. That was the last time I ever heard from them. And that was the only time I ever heard from them. Never seen them, never, nothing.
I mean, I think the main issue here, I'm gonna keep coming back to this because I'm need everybody to focus on this. If they would have replaced this fence 1 or 2 panels at a time over a month, we'd not even be sitting here. Because they decided to do it in a day, now all of a sudden we're here.
So,
I don't agree with this.
right. So can I, but I just want to make a point that the conditional use permit as described doesn't solve their problem.
Correct. It makes it worse.
Right.
But we've changed the recommendations in the past. I mean, I
Yep.
personally have done it.
So we would have to, there would be a motion to permit a non-compliant use. It's not a conditional use permit.
Right.
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 And we've done it before,
No.
multiple
So
times.
we've also enforced on Third and McDowell on a side street yard, a non-compliant 6-foot fence on the corner unit there that was built. We've enforced a requirement for their fence to be cut down to 3 inches and half the panels to be removed, and we made them cut it in a scallop fashion to make it look good. But that's a long time ago.
And I probably wouldn't have agreed with that.
I
either.
know.
I mean, there's been a lot of things that have been brought
So,
forward to
so
us. So
here's
we
here's
try-
my question.
Just one moment, because we
Yeah.
try, I think the important thing is we need to make sure that we're here for the community and the public and try to work with them on these situations. And I think this is one of those situations where we can work with them because to me, it makes a lot of sense.
What would your, so, I'm cool. What would your position be on how we should move forward?
A case-by-case basis. If
How
it-
about
if it's-
so somebody transfers a non-compliant property. They inherit it non-compliant. They have no requirement ever to bring it to compliance?
Depends on the situation.
My last house, my garage was like 2 feet off the property line, and it was like the only place you could put a garage. I would hope that you'd make an exception if I wanted to remodel that garage. I would hope you'd make an exception. So yeah, I believe.
That's what my wife Roxanne hoped Joel Messler would say on our garage once, and he said no.
Do we go above, I mean, then
So-
I think if we can't agree on it, I think their next step would be the zoning board of appeal, because that's what they're supposed to do, right? So if we can't do it, that should be where they have to go.
The zoning board of appeals cannot look at the financial hardship as the criteria.
We're not
So-
looking at financial hardship, we're looking at, they didn't do anything wrong. And if they would've did it one simple little different way, even paying Magic Fence to do it, we wouldn't be
So-
here today.
And my point isn't disagreeing with what the ultimate outcome of our recommendation on this is, right? What makes me uncomfortable about this situation completely, right, is that we provided a notification, right? Now, whether the notification, the notification will say was not transmitted at close, right? should the city have a bigger responsibility at transfer of identifying non-compliance? And from that point forward, expect future changes that are compliant.
They might have to look into a different way of notifying the new purchasers instead of relying on just the title company. Hopefully they get it, because I mean, you bought a house, you know how many papers you get.
Oh, I know, yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna say, I'm looking at that document, I don't ever remember seeing one of those. And
Well,
I
you would
bought-
never have seen this. This is the transmittal between the city and the title company, right?
Right, but the buyer should be known about the utility billing clerk, from the treasurer. They should get a copy of that just so they have it for their records. And if if it gets lost in the mix, maybe it doesn't get correctly, hey, here, this is what you have to do. Maybe they didn't get that. Maybe we need to start sending them out 6 weeks after the property's transferred or something, via certified letter, so we know it's come.
So let's get, Ryan, you're not, so to get us back on track, they don't want a conditional use. Because the conditional use that you guys are prepared to give them doesn't solve their problem.
It provides them that only have to set back 8 feet versus 25 feet.
And he expressed directly that he didn't want to set a fence back 8 feet because he didn't want to lose yard. He didn't want a 4-foot fence. So the question for us is, how would you instruct the Plan Commission to adopt a motion to recommend to the Common Council that they accept this non-compliant fence?
And I was hoping that Mike Slavny might be able to, but I don't think the staff, you can do whatever you want. The staff cannot recommend that you make a motion recommending something that's against our ordinances. The option was to change the ordinance. You can't just make recommendations that are not consistent with
If
our
I could, for
ordinances.
just, Mike, are you actually on with us?
No.
It'd be nice if we,
He was probably anticipating, he has that other meeting,
Okay.
so he was probably anticipating more for the comp plan than maybe these other items.
The other thing, and I really don't want to bring this up.
I'm on.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to bring, I just, real quick, I hate to bring this up, but it's a really sore subject for me. That's like we have a sidewalk ordinance in the city that is always, depending on who you are,
Right.
you get to not have to put one in. Especially on Phoenix Street, which is one of the busiest streets around my area, and you don't have to put one in, but I had to put one in on my street. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I think we should be able to make changes to things, and I'm just leaving it at that.
But
then you're
supposed,
opposed to them making changes for special purposes.
No, I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not.
I know.
I'm not.
Oh, okay.
but,
It's irritating to me that I didn't get it,
Oh, okay.
but other people have. It's just.
and I wish
it's
that we
just-
had sidewalk on Phoenix Street too, so.
So,
But Mike, Mike, are you there?
I am.
Okay, and so we're talking about that they're putting up a fence to provide a fence that's not provided for under the code.
and the conditional use that they would request doesn't solve their problem. And so the question prompted, which is directed now at you, is how would a plan commission make a recommendation to a common council to accept a non-compliant fence outside of a conditional use and outside of an ordinance?
I think, well, I think there are 3 paths. To me, this is a classic instance of a zoning variance, which doesn't go to the planning commission, it goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And variances by their nature can be requested to address a hardship where you don't want to set precedents with a code amendment, which would be the second path, the code amendment. I think it's unusual to try and address this with a conditional use. Um, and I've never liked this application for conditional uses because I think it puts you in a corner that at times is hard to get out of. And I think this is one of those instances.
So you would recommend that the plan commission make that pass a motion indicating its support for a zoning variance to allow the non-compliant fence is the best way to go?
I think that would be the best first choice. An alternative would be to do a code amendment if one can be crafted to address the situation around the city. But what I'm hearing is the desire of the Plan Commission to solve this problem and not necessarily look for a solution around the city.
In
Because the code works.
the General Operations Committee chose to not want to deal with general ordinance change to deal with it.
Right.
So it made it a case issue.
Mike, can I?
I think this is, I'm not a fan of variances, but I think this is a situation where we're dealing with a single piece of property that has a very particular issue, and I think that's what would make this a very appropriate variance kind of request.
So, Mike, just a clarification, this is Denise, because variances shouldn't be from a financial hardship. So how do you get around that in terms of they can put the 4-foot fence up, they can put the landscaping up so what is the hardship that creates? That's just a question that I have.
Well, that would be for the zoning appeals to deal with, not staff and not the plan commission. If I was on the zoning appeals, I might feel, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. Let's grant them a variance. I could see where members of the zoning appeals might say they've got other solutions that are available to them, like a chain link fence and a arborvitae hedge. May not grant a variance, but I don't feel that requests to reduce the requirements of the zoning ordinance through a conditional use process are appropriate.
Mike, this Will Gahaka. You said you had 3 possible choices, but you only had the opportunity to talk about a zoning variance.
Right, well, the third approach would be to propose a plan development, but that's a very, very complicated process, and we're talking about an accessory structure. And I think that would be a waste of time and energy and money on the part of the applicants. It's available in the code, but it would be my least recommended of the 3 possibilities.
Thank you.
So Mike, would you, I guess, recommend that any kind of a motion go towards the zoning board of appeals as opposed to the common council?
Well, the decision to go to the zoning board of appeals is the property owners. It's not the plan commission's job to refer things to the zoning board.
So I guess at this point, if the petitioners, but the easiest thing, if petitioners don't want the conditional use, could they actually request that be withdrawn at this point and not take any action on it?
Well, that would be the easiest way to dispose of the issue in front of the plan commission, I think, would be to withdraw the request.
That doesn't solve the problem.
Well, then they can make,
My point is, the zoning ordinance does not allow reductions of requirements through a conditional use process.
I agree.
I realize it doesn't solve the problem, but I think we're in the wrong process to get to a solution.
So they can then make application for for a zoning appeal, is what Mike is
For a zoning
recommending.
variance.
The variance.
Do we already have that language that allows them to apply for a zoning variance, or is that something that we need to have added?
No, there is a process and a separate commission, zoning board of appeals that reviews those.
Okay. Has that gone there already?
No.
It
that's what
has
they-
not.
Okay. So yet again, we're moving the ball. I apologize for that. I'm learning just as much as you are.
And
Yeah,
with-
so,
is the zoning board of appeals the same as board of appeals?
right, and so
Okay.
some of you are also on
That's
that.
what I
So you,
wanted to-
so you have a second, you'll have a second opportunity to consider it, because I think, I believe all our citizen members of the Plan Commission are also on the Zoning Board of Appeals. So 4 of you will the elected representatives on the Plan Commission cannot serve on the Zoning Board of Appeals. So there is 1 additional person, I think, and then the 4 Plan Commission members. And that is to keep some consistency, so you'll have a lot of information on this, and which will help you, give you some guidance in your decision making.
So,
So, I guess the question would be is whether the petitioners want to withdraw their petition.
That's what we have to do to get to the next step. Like I said, we only did the condition reviews because we didn't know what to.
It's okay, it's
No,
okay.
You don't have to
We don't either.
apologize.
Hey,
We're learning
At
too.
least with this, you can keep your fence at least a little bit longer.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I wanted to go there the last time, but we wanted to try the ordinance thing first, so.
So if you maybe just ask that the Plan Commission, that the petition be withdrawn. Just ask for
We have to
the application be
please
withdrawn.
withdraw our application for conditional use permit.
Okay.
So moved.
So,
thank you.
so we probably want an official
Yeah.
motion on
Yeah,
that, so
he
that
just-
They
there's-
withdrew it.
And
We
I
don't have to
second.
do anything.
Okay, if they would, all right.
Before we leave though, can we discuss whether or not the city, when it identifies a non-compliance, you guys don't have to,
Yeah, you guys.
some of us will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
for your
you
Thank you
both
very
for your
much.
time as well.
Appreciate it.
It's not on the agenda.
It's
You can add it to the big clubs, Jeff.
Can we add something to future agendas regarding accountability?
I think, yeah, I mean, we can just
Because this is
add
clearly a
it
matter of
on,
accountability.
on
at the end
for
of the day,
another
yeah.
agenda item, sure. And is that where you were going with it as well?
Well, and what is our process
Yes.
to ensure that non-compliant property, when transferred, the purchaser is notified?
Sure, and I mean, that's something that I think is appropriate for another future agenda for this. And then also, I would just say, when we talk about General Operations Commission, and they didn't want, that was under the old General Operations, and that's, I think, with the exception of maybe 1 remaining person, that committee has changed drastically. So I don't know if that's,
Yeah, I got the feeling at that meeting, they didn't wanna dirty their hands with that one. They're
Well,
like, this is our
and,
last
and
one.
I think the issue was, and several of them were, and I think it said in the minutes, were concerned, this may be appropriate in some locations, but they were concerned at creating alleys. If you have a lot of backyards, the reason for it is you do not want to create this feel of an alley with fences right on the roads. And if you've been through areas, it does become a very, it's not a very friendly atmosphere from people who are driving on the streets. And so that's what that was really, that's why, and I think they just felt that from their perspective, they didn't want to, to see that created throughout the community when you have backyards on a street.
okay. All right, well, then we'll have some future discussion then on this issue. If, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 6 then, which is review the draft number 1 of the comprehensive plan. 6.1 is review and discussion of draft number 1 for the City of Delavan comprehensive plan update. Who wanted, start us off on this 6.1 item?
Yeah. Hello, all. My name is Ben Rohr. I'm with Vanderwall and Associates. My colleague Mike Slavny, who you've already met. For a good majority of you, we were here back in December and had a conversation as far as a kickoff for this project goes. As the situation that unfolded in March and April, this project got shifted a little bit farther down the timeline. And so here we are today, back in front of you with the first draft. So I really wanted to go through that 5 or 4-page packet that's at the front of the report and kind of hit some highlights for you, get into a couple of key policy questions that we want to start the conversation on, and then open it up to you guys in terms of if you've gotten into the depths of the document at this point, what questions or comments you would have. So the front of that is familiar to some. That is what is a comprehensive plan. And essentially, as it says right there, the comprehensive plan is different than a zoning ordinance, different than a subdivision ordinance. And so it's a true plan for the future, but there are requirements in terms of consistency. So that future land use map and the policies written in that document need to be consistent with any change that occurs to a subdivision ordinance, zoning ordinance, things along those lines. So this is a true update, whereas an amendment is a smaller scale addressing one specific component. That can happen from time to time. For instance, it happened with the intergovernmental agreement that was established in 2017 and 18 with the town. That required an amendment to the plan, but a full update occurs every 10 years, and that's a more dramatic change in terms of large scale addressing needs and different trends and policies and things along those lines. So as you can see there, a comprehensive plan addresses a lot of different issues between land use, transportation, housing, a lot of different components. There's 8 total components there. And implementation is one key component that's at the end of the plan that kind of develops an action plan for what the city will do moving forward. In addition to the land use chapter is particularly pertinent to this group as you're administering and advising on certain situations that come about over the next decade. So that's kind of a high level view of what a comprehensive plan is and why it's important and what kind of components make it up. So with that, I'll move to page 2. That's a project schedule there. And basically, we're looking at approximately a year-long process. We started back here at December 9th at the Plan Commission, where we kind of asked open-ended questions about what people were excited about, what things have changed, what needed to be addressed, and things along those lines. Then we worked with staff this spring to develop the draft 1 that you have in front of you today. We will be back here pending any other future issues in July, and that would be to review draft 2 after making the changes discussed this evening and or that you may have along the road. And then we'll go to a public open house where the public will be invited. That'll probably be some version of a virtual and in-person option. And then a couple of joint meetings with the council to move this thing forward towards adoption. And so with our schedule right now, it looks like we're aiming for late fall, around Thanksgiving, potentially early December for adoption at this point. For those of you who were not part of the December 9th meeting, I did want to provide kind of context as to what was discussed and what points came out of that discussion. We got basically, those open-ended questions that I had referenced before, the need for continued focus on downtown, especially implementing the downtown plan that was adopted in 2015, 2016, in that range there. Really wanted to highlight some of the successful redevelopment and new development that's happened in the city, especially probably post 2015. So over the past 5 years or so, there's been some exciting things that have happened, and people wanted to reference those. for instance, the redevelopment of the dog track into the Fleet Farm, the new fire station, things along those lines. Then there was the need to kind of highlight some future opportunities that exist within Delavan, and this was reuse of big box stores was a discussion that we had. The new industrial development along towards the northeast portion of the city, leveraging the natural resources that are available to Delavan to attract tourism, but also new residents and businesses along those lines. And then some new developing trends or issues that people identified as areas that we should at least address within this plan and start discussing how we could provide some solutions to. And those were older commercial along some older corridors, potentially the substandard housing issue, lacking of residential growth comparatively since the recession to before the recession, declining school enrollment, affordable housing. Those were some kind of generalized topics that we discussed together and identified. So the top of page 3 is kind of a summary of what we heard there in the December 9th meeting, in addition to what we talked about with staff, and then generally what Mike and I see at a larger kind of scale for communities in this area, communities throughout the state and the Midwest. And so those are broken up into 5 bullet points there. They're overarching, and these help guide the remainder of the plan and how we develop changes to the plan. So first was population and demographic shifts. We've seen minimal growth over the past 10 years from the previous plan. I'm sure you guys are aware of this. But in addition to these components, there's people living longer, so we have a larger aging community. We have smaller household size because of different preferences that people have. They're waiting longer to get married, or they're not getting married, or they're waiting longer to have children. There's all those types of components that build into a smaller household size. So while the population might not be rising, there might be different needs for housing in the community to fill. And we'll get into that diversity of housing topic later on. Some of the other, or another one of the opportunities and issues is the housing shifts. This is the long-term impact of the Great Recession that it's had on Delavan, on the area, and on the state in general. The need for a housing diversity, meaning not just new single family or not just new large-scale multifamily, but where's the missing middle gap? The two-family, the duplex, the townhouse, the small 3 to 4 unit quadplex, something like that. Where's the missing middle gap that we need to fill to provide for those smaller households and to provide options for people who live in the community who may not want a single family house. And then there's the city's existing assets and current momentum in terms of development. So the community has seen new development recently, redevelopment that I just highlighted, and so we want to capitalize on that, we want to leverage that, and we want to highlight that as a positive attribute of the community and trend moving forward. Then there's redevelopment, reinvestment, and new development that gets along the same lines of some of those new trends and new projects that are happening, but also some of the issues related to, we have a lot of vacant platted subdivisions that are not filled. We have old strip commercial that's deteriorating in some places. Then there's the vacant big box stores like Shopko and potentially others. And property maintenance in residential neighborhoods. And then finally, this was not on our radar in the December meeting, but clearly needs to be addressed within the comprehensive plan, at least mentioned. And while we don't know the impacts of what's going on right now, and no one does, we do need to make sure that it's on everyone's radar. And there are going to be opportunities for potentially large-scale stimulus money to come out, similar to what happened post-2008. And if the city's in a position to leverage that opportunity with a project, especially economic development related, this is something we wanted to highlight in the plan to bring awareness to that and get the ball rolling in that facet. So, moving down the page to the changes from the '09 draft, I'll really hit these kind of high level, but we updated all the data, all the references, all the maps. We moved a big chunk of the raw data, as I should say, in the table format to the back of the plan, so it's easier to consume as far as the body of the plan itself. Added an executive summary and this issues and opportunities chapter. So really, if someone is just going to pick up the plan and do nothing else with it, look at those 3 or 4 pages and they get the gist of what's going on. And then we added strategies and recommendations related to what we just talked about in terms of the issues and opportunities. So I will close with, and we completely revamped the implementation action item table that is on page 113 to reflect these new policies and to update some of the stuff that was still ongoing. So some stuff got carried over from the previous plan, and then others was just expanded upon, and new stuff was added. So I will quit rambling here, but and open up the floor to more of a discussion format. But I really wanted to get your guys' provide some context to the people who weren't here before, and really give a high-level overview of what we've worked with staff over the past few months to come up with. So there's 5 kind of key policy decisions that I think we identified with staff as we were reviewing the plan that we'd like to address. I don't think we need to have solutions to these today. We don't have to have a answer confirmed today, but I think we want to have a conversation about what that looks like. So the first one is diversity of housing options. In the previous plan, all of these were stated as future intended desire for residential. The single family, 2-family, small scale multifamily, and large scale multifamily, we all wanted to promote all of those different kinds. And it kind of gets into the second question there too, about what does that breakdown look like, and what are we looking to see the city develop into in terms of new neighborhoods. So really we want to talk about what kind of future housing do we want to see at the policy level promoted as far as the future of Delavan. So I will open that up to kind of a discussion format about, does anybody have any thoughts as to the different options there that are listed? Yeah. Yes.
Ben, I was obviously one of the new guys that you were making reference to, and I appreciate your review. I'm kind of coming in the middle of this, so I've got a lot of catch up to do. I have a couple of concerns. I went through the information briefly that I just received electronically, and a couple of concerns that popped out at me. And one of them we can address now because you've already opened the door to it, and that is the planned neighborhoods thing.
Mm-hmm.
This was a policy, if I recall, Mr. Mayor, that was adopted by the council some years back.
It was adopted in the comprehensive plan, and the council did approve that, yeah.
It goes all the way back to the first smart growth, which
Yeah.
I think several of us.
And yet, while I won't get into the percentage of mix because I'm not sure what that should be, I guess. It seems to be, and you've already mentioned it, there's a lot of platted developments in our community now that have gone undeveloped. And I'm going to approximate there's something like 600 potential units somewhere in that number, in that neighborhood, in our community right now, that are already platted, that I presume whatever we do here would not change that picture. I don't know how accurate that number is, but it's.
There's several, but I don't know, we don't have 600 left.
Some of the flats reverted back.
Yeah.
So I think it was 600 to 700 at one time, but that was before some of those flats were taken.
It,
But there's still space for them.
yeah. Uh, Considering making lot sizes smaller doesn't seem to me to be addressing a problem that essentially is out of the city's control, and that is the economy. The economy will come back, it won't come back. What we can address, and I think has maybe gone lacking a little, again, in the cursory view that I've got, is the having a more aggressive role in developing industry in and around our community to bring people here, to stop the dwindling population that we've seen in the past few years. It doesn't seem to me like the plan gives that the attention that I would like to see anyway. Again, going back to the smaller house sizes aren't going to make any difference one way or the other if we don't have people moving to our community.
Yes, I think within the future land use map, there is areas identified for future industrial development in that northeast area along the interstate. There is the TIF 6, right, or TIF? Yes, to expand that, right, to include more lands that would be development ready for industrial sites. I think both of those components address a little bit of what you're talking about. I think as far as a policy decision goes, yes, we could emphasize that more within future policy areas of focus, I guess you could say.
Another piece of that puzzle is we have a developer to the east of us that has gone through all the steps to build a lot of what you're suggesting here. Small homes, a lot of multifamily homes. And that, if we were to do this in the city as well, would put us in competition with a fella who is already 5 years ahead of us.
Right. I don't think that should say that we shouldn't do it necessarily. I think the small lot residential issue, I do want to speak to that a little bit. And you're right, it is an economic market-driven development. And it's not because this plan says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But the option right now isn't there without going through a plan development or something along those lines to accommodate what you did at the resort, I think, right? With the smaller lot. Yeah. So what you could do is adopt a new zoning district that would specifically address a smaller lot, single-family option, and somewhere around 6,000. And this is what we're seeing very popular in some of the metro areas that are growing the fastest in Wisconsin. And it's just an alternative option that could potentially lower the cost for a new home buyer to get into a house. Because if there's less land that they have to pay for, that equates to a smaller dollar figure that they have to pay up front. And so that would be what the smaller lot size would accommodate. Not to say that that's a fix-all for everything, but that's just an option out there.
Ben, this is my third ride on this parade, and I want to thank you guys because you, with very minimal input and a long delay, have continued to develop a great document. The key policy decisions sections, however, was a disappointment to me, having read the whole thing. right? Because to me, the diverse housing options, planned neighborhoods, conversion of single family to do family, implementation action items, which is like a implementation step, all are, if these are issues, what are the questions, right? And to me, it seems that you believe that we've answered a whole bunch of growth questions for the city of Delavan to get us to those points, right? And so when I looked at the document, I went all the way back to the vision, right? Which is, I guess, a few pages forward here,
Yeah,
right?
executive
And-
summary. Yeah.
And to begin with, and when I read it, so it's, I guess, page 8 in the appendix, right? The first page of the executive summary,
Yes.
right? And to begin with, when it said in 2040, right? I'm like, okay, so I'm 82. And so what I'm planning about isn't about whether I've got small lots or big lots, whether I've got multifamily housing or whether I have a mix of single-family housing and stuff like that. It's what is the state of this community in 2040, right?
What we want it to
And-
look like.
Right. And so what do we want it to look like has a lot to do with the world that it's in at that point, right? And I think a lot of what we're talking about in the document today really is a continuation of the arc we're on that doesn't recognize the point that Will just raised, which is we can say bigger, smaller, higher, lower, right? The fact of the matter is the world around us is changing dramatically. The economy can come and go and bust and be vigorous, but there are some things we know, right? One of the things that we know is that the world is transitioning from an industrial economy to an information and technology economy.
At a macro scale. Or,
Right.
yeah.
And so I read in the Tribune this morning, top 2 declining cities of the top 15 in the nation, Rockford and Decatur, Illinois. 2 cities who were 85,000, 100,000 in the 1980s, who held onto their industrial plans, right, and have watched industry, offshore industry change, technology grow, and haven't really adjusted their worlds, right? Rockford lost 7.5% of its population, right, from 2010 to 2019, according to the Tribune this morning. So we're bemoaning the fact that we're not growing. Well, it's not that bad. In the vision, and we mentioned in the December meeting, our first meeting, right, the need for technology infrastructure, and in the vision, we're going to ensure that we're sustainable and environmentally rich, but we haven't done anything in terms of building a technological infrastructure for the workers of 2040 who probably aren't working in Milwaukee and Chicago and Madison, but they're working in their homes, right?
Yeah.
And so my question is, when we think about what this planning document should be, do we have our heads raised high enough above the horizon so that we're not just thinking about how do we want to change the map, what should we change about lot sizes and stuff like that, and what are we really want to suggest our development goals are here, right? In the chapter on economic development, right? And in a couple of other places, we reference a statistic that's in the appendix, easily found in the appendix, that says 81% of the people who work in Delavan live outside the city, while conversely, 76% of people who live in Delavan work, 81% of the people who work in Delavan live outside of the city, right? Conversely, 76% of the people who live in Delavan work outside the city. So if that's not a definition of a bedroom community with an imported workforce on a daily basis, I haven't heard one, right? Yet we continue to talk about economic development for jobs. Jobs for who? 8 of the 10 jobs that we create, based on this statistic, are for people who lived outside the community.
Right.
And 8 of 10 of the jobs that citizen residents have aren't even here.
Right.
Right? And so, just let me finish, and then I'll shut up. My point is, I think we're looking at this traditionally. I think we're at a point where the economy's changing, where what Delavan's old advantages were, what Delavan's old leverages were because of its physical proximity, access, and stuff like that, are beginning to be less and less relevant, right? And we need to really think about, in a world where networking and information infrastructure are more important, what do our residents deserve? Not necessarily what do our businesses who might come here, who bring people from outside of the community, deserve. And I think once we talk about what 2040 works like, then I think we can talk about some of these other policy questions.
Can I add something to that? Are you familiar with Gig City? Gig City is, for anybody that isn't aware, Gig City is the new moniker for Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Right.
And Chattanooga, Tennessee started with a problem where all of their mines were no longer producing coal because the coal industry was being shut down. They lost all of their infrastructure completely, and they wanted to do something to cut costs for the city, provide resources for their residents, and their solution was to move their internet internally by the city over the power lines. It served two purposes. It provided very high-speed internet to everyone that lived in the city as a utility, which generated income. It also provided the mechanism to track any particular outage for power instantaneously and reroute it. Both of those combined factors were instrumental in bringing big business there that were focused on instant deliverable technology, which drove their economy through the roof subsequently. So I think that that is exactly what you're talking about,
Right.
and I'm very happy to know that this is an issue that was discussed previous to me joining this committee as a value. That provides a value for the community, for the businesses in our community, and it's a huge draw. Those sorts of initiatives are definitely what's needed.
So
Especially now.
right. And so
Because real quick, because a lot of companies have realized because of the pandemic that individuals can work from home.
Anywhere.
So
They can
right.
work from anywhere.
Right. So this is gonna be more of a thing now. I think if we can get ahead of this
So
as much
what's
as we
the
can, we
vision?
need to.
The vision is Delavan is an exurb where people have a tremendous residential quality of life. I'm going to propose a complete alternate, right? Where they work at home. Where the industrial park has been turned into a park,
That's visionary.
right? Where they have walk around free mobile access on 7G in 2040, right? To do their work or do their schooling in whatever environment they cared for. And it's not a constrained place where all the city's buildings, businesses, and neighborhoods will make more efficient and sustainable use of energy, water, and land and other value resources, and residents will enjoy the benefits of safe, clean streets, air, and water. That's a nice place. And for the 5,000 people left in 2040, right, they'll enjoy it, but that's not how you build a vibrant community in 2040. And so my point is the developed world economies have transitioned from industrial to information, right? The transition affects every element of work, social, home, school, right? It's essential. It's not .20 that we're going to have good broadband in the utilities section. And we should clearly have a vision that includes being a community with a technological infrastructure that meets the needs of residents, businesses, and institutions. It is more, I said, as critically important as sustainability and environment, because if you don't have a planet to live on, it doesn't matter how fast your internet is, right? But the fact of the matter is, you know, I think that when I looked at the plan, I felt like it was 2000 to 2010, maybe 2010 to 2020. It wasn't 2020 to 2040 based upon the last decade I lived through and the last year we lived through and how people were changing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the conversation that we wanted to have, is in this format, find out what are these bigger, larger issues that you want to see addressed and you want to see refined within this document. And I can take this sentiment and refine the vision statement to reflect that.
Right.
But I don't think it was, I may have misinterpreted your last.
Don't say you don't think you did your job right. This is a process.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
But I'm also saying that I didn't hear the level of priority on that topic in December, or at least I didn't interpret it that way.
I don't think that some of us understood how important that was at the time. I think now, with the pandemic,
Things have changed, yeah.
everybody working from home and everybody that has to have internet at home now, it has gone that way. So I think you guys were sort of at a disadvantage starting this in December, and the world has changed tremendously in the last 6 months. This would have probably been great back then. But the thing that I want to add, if I can, what are other communities in Walworth County doing that their population is increasing but ours is decreasing? And I've noticed that over the last 5-10 years, we've sort of been stagnant. We used to be the bigger community in Walworth County, and now we're not. Elkhorn's bigger than us. Lake Geneva's bigger than us. All these other communities are bigger than us. Before we know it, Williams Bay is going to be bigger than us. What do they have that we necessarily don't? Or what can we get, like the broadband? Can we get these bike trails in? Because I know communities I visited, family, the bike trails are great. You know, I think that's something, but when do you get these things done so you can start increasing the population of Delavan to the point where you can get some of these things done? Because I've been on the planning commission a lot before, and one of the problems was is we weren't getting I can't think right now, building permits for single family homes. We just weren't, there weren't any. I mean, the last building inspector was here, nope, none this month, none this month. I think we all knew that. I mean, Mr. Kahapka was on with me back then. Remember that? There was none. You know, we did get a little bit recently, but how do we get that going again? Where people want to, I mean, this is a great community and that's why I live here, but how do we get it to
Chris, I think
back
that's
that way?
probably what Kevin is speaking to here, is that what resources do we have or can we develop to bring people to the community of 2040?
Oh, right, I agree.
The community of 2040 is not like Elkhorn, it's not like Lake Geneva. It's it's gonna be totally different.
So,
I
It's not-
agree.
it's
But
not-
what I'm saying is, can we take some stuff that they've done and then do our own things so that we can grab them?
Certainly, but-
Like the broadband, I think that is an excellent idea where we can get we could get
That's,
even industry and other things in here that
it's a
they're
tool,
stealing
it's
from
an
us now.
important tool, quality of life. People are gonna wanna live in a place where they can enjoy life and be at work at the same time.
Right.
so I don't know what the answer to your question is, right? But part of my career was, what are the features that I want to sell to somebody to make them want to do something, right? And so the proposal, my perspective is that having a residence-based focus, what makes this a place I want to live, right? The answer we've had for the last 20 years, I think, has been, it's a place where I'll create jobs for you, right? I'm just saying, if you were on the outside looking in at the policy activities of councils and administrators and stuff like that, and looked at how much time you hear them spending, it's been primarily on how do I create new businesses come into my community and stuff like that, right? And I think the thing that just set me back on my heels, because I've been part of that, right? This is my third time on this thing, right? It's like, yeah, we've been doing that and we were wrong, because most of the jobs we created for people who weren't here. And we weren't thinking about, how do we make this place a place people want to live?
Right.
And so I have always believed, when you're looking at organizational goals or moving something forward, you start with your first principle, right? And my first principle is, this development plan should be, how do we make Delavan a place people want to live? Not a place people want to work, because only 18% of our residents or 20% of our residents actually work where they are living, right? It's like, how do I attract them to live here? And it's through, so if you were WeWork or Google saying, how do I get somebody to work here or rent in my facility, you'd say, oh, there's a series of amenities that I provide, right? It's cheap. It satisfies your needs for your kids. Guess what? You don't pay an extra bill. It's in your property tax to get the highest speed internet you could ever have, right? You're automatically connected, right? All those kinds of features, and I think that kind of exploration is an exploration that would be worthwhile.
Right, and I said I agreed with you on that wholeheartedly. I also agree with the parks and everything else, and the bike trails I think are huge. You got to give that outlet to people that want to live here.
Well, part of the mechanism to make that appealing is to make it also non-obtrusive. So Wi-Fi in the parks, so people can come and go as they want. It's all connected to the individual person who lives in the community. Anybody that's visiting would be somebody that would have access potentially at a cost. Anybody that's working here would have access to it while they're working here. Those sorts of things. And that's something that can be done so that you can still enjoy the outdoors. You can not be inundated with towers everywhere. This can be done smartly so that you maintain the small hometown feel that people love in their homes.
All right. Yes, I think
We're not meeting your needs.
I agree with the discussion, and I think that points me in a great direction as to how to refine the document, the vision statement, prioritize things differently. I think all of that is helpful for me. I think there is some momentum, and it is written in the document about regional collaboration. And I don't think thinking of Delavan as a singular unit is going to be the most economically productive over time. It is interconnected with the entire area, and leveraging those opportunities does bring new residents, does bring new visitors, and leveraging what is already in the area and focusing on a regional economic approach can be beneficial to everyone.
So to that point, you write, right? Attract and retain businesses that capitalize on Delavan's regional position, right? And my question is, what is Delavan's regional position that's relevant 20 years from now? Okay, so when George Borg built that factory over there, right, he took advantage of Delavan's regional position, right? It was close to Milwaukee, okay, it was close to Rockford, it was close to Chicago, it was close to agricultural implement manufacturing in the Quad Cities where he came from. He could build clutches and sell them all over the place, right? That factory is now an apartment complex because the regional advantages of Delavan have changed, right? So my point is, we've sat here and we've said, proximately, we're in a great place, right? And we were in a great place when you needed light manufacturing to support heavy manufacturing in large industrial places for a strategy that called for light manufacturing industrial parks, right? Now, when you're thinking about 2040, are we going to have large manufacturing in Chicago, in Milwaukee? Probably still have it in the Quad Cities because my hometown just won't give up on John Deere, right? But what are the regional advantages to Delavan at that point? And so I agree with you. We got to think about where we live, but we got to think about it within a new framework. So if I have to go to the office once or twice a week, and my accounting firm is in Milwaukee or in Chicago, and I've got great high-speed internet in Delavan, and I've got great regional transportation access by getting on the commuter train in Harvard, Delavan is a great place for me to live. That's a regional advantage in a thinking and a technological world, right? What are other ones?
What are other ones?
Right. And so, for a long time, retail has been, seen as a great solution to development and stuff like that in these communities, right? And so if we're building an exurb community of people who are going to work in larger cities, having the right kind of shopping in for them is critical, right? Until they don't shop anymore, and the Kohl's becomes an Amazon outlet and distribution facility, right? I mean, not to say it is. I don't want to start any rumors, but what's our advantage?
Right, and I think there are several advantages outlined in the document that touch on stuff that you're talking about in terms of quality of life, transportation access, all of those types of things. There is the whole tourism element of the area that can be further leveraged. I think, and the broadband Wi-Fi technological component of that is certainly an area to focus in terms of a guide and a goal for the future. I think that's perfect. I think that there is a lot in the document that does touch on other components outside of a light industrial framework from a past generation, maybe.
Denise?
I'm going to play devil's advocate. Heaven likes to do that. But I do think the other thing is this last 6 months has also changed a lot. And I do think that in terms of, I think the high speed is great for residents, and I think it'll be great for encouraging industrial. But I think what the other thing it's told us is that of our prescriptions and where we're getting, I think that we shouldn't forget about that. I think now it's brought back that there is a need to produce here, and you can share those responsibilities, but there is gonna be a need to do that, so.
Well, I would, but I would contend, the other thing that we've learned is that the only people who will survive are scale producers.
I can
So
talk to that too.
unless we put Abbott in the industrial park, right, I'm not sure.
So, in addition to that, yes, you do need to produce things. However, we've also looked at declining manufacturing, which is all going to automation. So there's an instant necessity to be able to put up plants that are automated, which is not necessarily going to generate jobs. We know that for a fact, because that's the purpose. Higher end jobs would be in terms of maintaining the automation or doing some other things, but
But
they're
they'll be
still gonna
done
be
remotely.
they'll still be small in scope. If there's a component that's tied in with education internally, we can generate that and still generate high-paying jobs for people that live here. Provide automation for the area because we have land that we can expand into. That creates a subsequent list of other industries that will follow in alongside that. But that's still all super dependent on information traveling at the speed of light.
And that's what I say.
So there is a component that can be developed, but it is different. It is very different. And it's actually embracing rather than fighting. Because we have a small community that could empower our small community to capitalize on those opportunities. Our children, their children. They would be able to be put in a position where they're the first rung. They're right there. They live in town. And we can tailor the educational component directly to something like that, which also has the ability to move exceedingly fast. Now, I also want to make sure that people understand, this is a matter of scale. I've been following what Netflix is doing, what all the other movie industries are doing. They're all going to a streaming service. For those of you who are not aware, bandwidth is simply a matter of opening the faucet. So there are going to be companies like Comcast who are going to be capitalizing on the fact that there's a new demand for it. They'll increase the prices, or they'll just increase the amount of information that travels, which then puts the city reliant on something like that. We would need to think about that in terms of scale. What is fast enough? And that's something that needs to be scalable.
Okay. Any other, anybody else want to talk to that point before we move to something else?
I don't want to actually talk to that point. I want to
Okay.
talk to another point
Okay.
that you had in. I've been around a few more years than you have, and I've seen in some depressions, recessions, whatever you want to call them. You call it the Great Depression.
Great Recession.
2008.
And that was my question. What's your time frame here? The Great Depression was even before I was born.
Right. The one in 2008 is called the Great Recession.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what it's commonly
It
referred
was
to
just
as.
a point, it had nothing to do
Okay,
with this
yeah.
discussion. Just, I wonder what Ben's talking about. What does he mean?
That was, yeah. That was the term that was used to teach us in planning school what that time was referenced. And so that's what it's commonly referred to as. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it.
I slept through that class.
Ben, if I could, because I just wanted to give everyone else an opportunity to say a lot. It's good to listen to the other comments, and I was obviously on the council that was part of the meeting in December. I did want to highlight just a couple things. On page 50, there's reference to Lake Lawn Resort. I think the wording, I'd have to go back in the document, which I can do pretty quickly here. I think it said resort and conference center with, at 125 years. It's, to be exact, it's 141 years. I don't know if we want to just edit that small, minor little thing, but in the big scheme of things, when we're looking at tourism, and I agree with what's been said, is like, we want people to actually live here. I mean, we love people visiting, but we actually want people to live here. And so there's a lot of great, and there'll continue to be a lot of discussion on what brings people to actually live and build. And to Chris's point, there hasn't been a lot of necessarily residential homes. A couple, actually, we're encouraged that hopefully we may get more of that. Just the other night we talked about Ellis Farms and selling one lot, and then hopefully that works. Then maybe working out an agreement to sell 9 more lots. So we could have potentially pretty quickly more, hopefully keeping our fingers crossed, residential homes built in a shorter, in a short time compared to the last few years collectively. But one thing, and I've known this from serving, and I'm sure Will as a former alderman could remember this too. And then I think what was helpful for this last Saturday is that the council, which is 4 new faces collectively, with all new experience, I mean, all unexperienced, none of them have served in the role here locally. So one of the things that on our tour was to take a tour of the water facility and the issue of water. And I think on page 87 it talks about water, and to quote, it's satisfactory. I think it's beyond just satisfactory, to be honest. I've lived here all my life. I haven't been afraid to drink tap water out of our water faucets, and whereas some of these other communities, Elkhorn, I mean, they don't have that water, and in the future, I mean, water is going to be a huge resource.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I have to, because I work in Elkhorn.
Oh.
And we are getting warnings routinely that they have problems with their water. And I have to agree with you, Ryan, that our water here is great, especially compared to the other ones in the area. I mean, that's why
No,
and it was terrible.
I'm glad because that's what I've been hearing, but I don't work over there, so
Yeah.
that, you adding to that is very helpful, because it's not just hearsay, it's actually someone that's working over there, so that's good to know. But I think that's going to be, and I think relatively speaking, our water is pretty reasonable too, whereas you also don't get the quality, but then you're also paying a lot more. So I think where we can focus on that, I think in the future, and we talked about it on our tour, is the aquifers that run underneath this community. I mean, they are going to keep us well supplied within this community, and I think it could be a point that attracts residential people in the future, where, hey, water's a huge, very important resource, and so I just highlighted that on page 87. It said satisfactory, and I think it's much more than just satisfactory in when you compare it to other communities, as I said. And I think the big thing too, and I think Chris brought this point up as far as the biking. I mean, that is, the bike path is huge. It just, I think more and more people are realizing that, including myself. I'm like, I hadn't had a new bike since I was 12, so I'm like, I really want to get a new bike and just get out there with my kids and explore not only the bike trails right here in this community, but potentially elsewhere. And again, that would be, as we build upon that, another selling point to why visit Delavan and explore those trails along the way. And I think one thing we will have to, I think, talk about, it was brought up, but we really didn't touch on it, is potentially doing maybe an overlay of TIF potentially, and what would be number 6 potentially is, and I forget what page it's on, but something over the years that I thought I had written it down where but is the municipal airport that we have, and also trying to market that, because I think I mean, it's a great asset, but it's in badly need of some resources to upgrade the runway. I'm actually having meetings with several different people to see what between state and federal, if any, funds would maybe potentially go into it. Now, I thought I read where it said that hangars had been approved. I don't know that that's, I mean, they're,
Yeah.
was there one? Oh, okay.
approved the one, but also the plan for allowing the additional ones.
Yeah, I knew there was some talk, I guess I just,
And that was actually approved for the additional ones, and it has to bring in water.
oh, okay. So it's been approved, but we don't have an idea when that's actually, the first one would be constructed? Or-
The building permits are sitting downstairs,
Oh,
ready to be picked up.
okay, great.
Looks like they have some markings going on out there.
Great.
Yeah, I know we approved that a while ago now.
Hangars are the least of their problems.
Yeah, I knew there was some talk, and I guess
That runway is.
that's
is
one thing that,
closed, essentially, if you look at the end of the runway, there's a big X there, which means it's closed.
yeah, and I think,
FAA calls it a disaster.
yeah, and I think,
And Lake Lawn has no intention of putting any money into it. There's also some serious problems, geographic problems. The runway's too short, one. There's no crosswind runway, two. And there really isn't any property there that would provide, additional space necessary for a crosswind runway. So we're a long way from worrying about hangars.
well, I think there is some, I get the sense that there's some willingness to want to do some upgrades, which I think are important. I think that would attract, potentially, I mean, again, to everyone's point here, we want people actually like living here and owning a home here and that sort of thing. At the same time, we have to find that right balance about job creation. I think that's one of the things that potentially, could be an asset for industrial type manufacturing if there was amenities made to the runway and it is in need of bad repair, but I think there's some willingness to explore what options could potentially. I think, and again, just from a tourism standpoint, that brings in another whole dynamic of people just saying that I'm going to get in the plane, I'm going to discover Delavan, I'm going to stay at the resort for the weekend and fly in and fly out.
And that used to be huge when I was a kid.
Yeah.
The
And the
warbirds
birds,
and stuff like that. That'd be phenomenal to bring people back in the community for that. I do have one question. I know back when I was on before, there was discussion on what percentage of retail in this community that we have, and it's much higher than it would be that you would think of for the population. Do you have that for this?
The percentage of retail jobs or?
Retail square feet per pop is the statistic that we use.
I do
It
not
used to
have
be
that.
high.
Right.
Very, very high.
I would bet it still is.
Yeah,
And I was just curious if you knew that.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a few comments, if you want them this way. On page 6, you outlined key issues and opportunities. The first section was population and demographic shifts, right? And there's a reference there that says our forecast is it's going to grow between 0 and 3,000. And the population assumption is critical for one variable, and that is how much housing acreage is required, right?
Well, it
And-
plays a component in the future land use
And
map,
so
yeah.
my question is there a need to tighten the population forecast range? Because when I read the whole thing, that even at the high end, there's enough developable residential land, or are we comfortable with that wide range?
Well, so we developed the wide range because of the wide-ranging variables of the past 3 decades.
Okay,
So there's been enormous growth and then no growth.
so there's no need to say it's gonna be a number anywhere in that range, right?
We did select one in the middle to use as the projection for the future land use demand need.
Okay,
And so we took the middle one basically because that reflected both pre-recession and post-recession.
The second comment I have in that section is, I think we should include a trend of growing remote working patterns, not just based on what's happened in the last 6 months, but it's been ongoing, right? And that's a significant change in population, that folks are working remotely, and an advantage, I think, to this. In the housing section of the key issues, can you define a middle housing gap for me in economic terms? That phrase comes in the plan more every once in a while.
It's somewhere between a low-income, presumably multifamily unit, and a high-end $1 million house.
Isn't Delavan the solution to a middle housing gap? Right? I mean, the average home price you guys reference in the document is $140,000.
Right, but not everybody is looking for a single-family
So
home.
my question is, what is then in economic terms? Then what's the middle housing gap that we have to close?
I don't have,
Fill the missing middle housing gap.
as I was referencing in that, it is alternative options outside of the single-family or high-density multifamily. So that would be in reference to a two-family duplex or two-flat, or a three-family or townhouse or a fourplex.
And what's the
Something that
evidence
has,
that we aren't meeting that need?
because it's a trend that is at a larger scale in terms of population shifts, as was stated at the beginning. Household size is decreasing, so you need more alternative options outside of those two far spectrums, and usually those are the two spectrums that are getting developed.
So my point is, I think, I would say that part of the disconnect I had on your development questions, right, was that the case wasn't proven that there was a middle income housing gap to me in Delavan. Right? I can see that you can see it in a lot of other places. I can see what you just said about it's a bigger trend, right? But I don't know what housing strategy Delavan would have that's different than the one it has right now that would meet that need, which I think is what Will was getting to earlier.
So I think that that's dependent on doing a comparison from one city to another.
Right.
And if you look at that and you factor in that we're looking at a 40-year plan with potential growth and other things, we would need to figure out how that's going to be extrapolated into.
Right.
So I mean, we're looking at houses in the $140,000 range here, but those same houses are over $300,000 range in other communities. So that's the same square footage, the same amenities. It's just, and I mean, that's as close as Lake Geneva. So that's a huge difference in amenities, and it's a huge difference in perceived value from the purchaser, the homeowner, and the community at large. That perception is something that drives the market value. So I'm not sure that it's relevant to limit it to an economic term, because that's going to change with time. In fact, the definition of low income, middle income, I'm sure that that's going to change. It hasn't since the 70s, because those definitions are still in place, but that's beyond our control.
The next one in the housing section that I had a question, I'm sorry.
And just to feel, because we had a lot of discussion on this in terms of smaller lots. And the one thing that smaller lots does is it drives down the cost of development, because you're water and sewer. But then we talked about more, but creating instead of more open space. And we talked about in terms of environment and being attractive. So is that something that, looking at creating where
I
Is that
think
the
with
kind
the,
of quality of life that we're thinking Delavan should be headed towards in 24?
Where people are gonna be active, spend less time on your property, taking care of it,
Mhm.
and you provide those amenities that are close and.
So the advantage of the smaller lot size to the lot owner is, as referenced by Ben, it's cheaper. So there's a lot across the street from me that's been for sale for a year and a half, which I believe the city owns for $25,000. City doesn't own it anymore? City sold it, still for sale for $25,000.
City never.
Okay. It's for sale for $25,000. So if that house, if that lot was $12,000, would somebody build a house there? If it was half the size and two people build houses on it at $12,000, would somebody build a house there?
are you also thinking like condominium wise?
Right, it wouldn't be limited to just ownership, but yes, that is a trend we're seeing all over the place, and it's something that as personal preferences change, as a wider kind of demographic look at the world, I personally am an instance of waiting till I'm 30 before I'm even approaching buying a house. And so I've lived in an apartment for all of that time, whereas somebody before me might have already lived in a house for 5 or 10
You
years.
should have bought a house
And-
in Delavan and commuted to Madison. You could be paying yourself your equity portion for the last 10 years, Ben.
So basically, the trend basically is, and I've been watching this a little bit, and some things may have changed now, but like you said, the younger generation is now not buying a house. But then you also have the other trend of the older generation, like my parents, who moved into a condominium from a house that they always had to work in. So I think that's sort of what he's talking about, because I think very seldom with going around Delavan do you see Creekside, I think it is.
Right.
Creekside, yep. Creekside never has one of those open. Delbrook Farms, I don't think ever has one open. Eagle Point hardly ever has one of
Right.
those open. Those are places that people want to go, and I think that's sort of where you were going with that. Am I correct?
Right.
Because, I mean, there is that group that wants single-family homes, but they also want that, because I'll tell you, where I see where my parents live, it's attractive to even me, because I don't have to waste my time mowing the yard, shoveling the driveway. I mean, it's great, and I don't have to worry about the sidewalk police in the city, you know? But anyway.
Well, you didn't have to until last year.
I know. So I see the need for that kind of growth, that type of growth, so.
So, but that's a different type than small lot, single family.
Right. Right, but he also did mention
Right.
duplexes and all that, because technically, some of those are like duplex types.
In housing shifts, you wrote the declining population, increased aging population, regional growth of seasonal homes has contributed to declining school enrollment and school closures. There's no question school enrollment and school closures have happened, but based on the appendix chart, the total school enrollment decline is roughly 500 from the early 2000s, and in 2018 and 2019, 541 students from Delavan, Darien, net transferred out because of open enrollment. So I would contend that if we want to make a comment about why school enrollment has declined, we should blame the actual cause, which is open enrollment.
Well, I think there's actually two things for that, and I just want to mention, there's not as many kids as we used to have. You have to put that into play too. Open enrollment is a problem, and I will agree with that, but also the other problem is
Right.
there's not as many kids as there used to be. Our population is getting older. Where, like, I have 7 older brothers and sisters, okay? I have 2 kids. You know what I'm saying? So that's a huge difference.
But
We shouldn't overlook the nature of education is going to change as well.
right.
Correct.
So it's the big bricks and mortar buildings may be dinosaurs.
Correct.
The last thing I have on key issues is in your redevelopment section and your global pandemic section, my question about that area is, this is a 20-year document. right?
Yeah.
I mean, is global pandemic response actually in a 20-year document, or is it because it's recent and has had a huge impact that we should include it? And it's not a question that needs to be asked at draft 1. If it's still this big of an issue at draft 3, then I think it gets included. Otherwise, I would contend that it's a tactical element where the city should be saying what should be our extra plan activities between now and the end of the year to take advantage of any additional funding and development activity. In the chapter section, you have the section on agricultural resources, and in that goal section, we're very vigorous in our comment about protecting agricultural land. My only question is, should we be explicit in saying that what is in the policies and what is in the objectives should also be in the goal, that we're going to utilize our extraterritorial agreements and rights to ensure that? That's just an edit question. In the natural resources section, I have a question for you, and that is, when do we coordinate with the Lake Comus district about what their plans are for this time horizon?
Somebody with the city sits on that board, right?
Right.
Yeah, I haven't had a meeting yet, but.
But so my point is, we're making some comments about, stuff needs to be done or doesn't need to be done. It would seem that there should be some coordination.
And some of that, and we've had some discussions, because that was also a big element, a big factor in the downtown strategic plan.
Right.
To try to incorporate more effective utilization of that the lake and make it more of an amenity to the entire community.
Right. In the land use section, we generally conclude there's adequate land available for housing in any planning scenario, right? And we say consequently, there's no requirement for annexation, okay, in chapter 6, okay? As I understand it, and as you wrote in the early part of the document, if there's going to be an annexation in the time of the plan, it has to be included in the plan.
There is.
And so my only question is, are there potential annexations of existing development land that should be included? Or are the only potential annexed lands those that are already governed by the intergovernmental agreement with the town of Delavan? And it doesn't need to be resolved now, right? It's just a question. My other question, which goes to Will's first question, right, which was, given we've concluded in the housing section that there's adequate levels of available housing growth capacity, why would we consider changing the housing mix or lot size? And so the question the answer I think we've gotten to is economic, right?
And there's opportunities outside of new land. There's redevelopment and infill opportunities that could satisfy those different housing types.
But you raised some housing mix questions in the infill area too. So.
Right.
It's economic. It's not for capacity reasons, is your answer.
The city has the ability to annex land and potentially could annex land.
I'm past the annex question.
Okay.
I'm on the why would we consider the housing mix change?
To promote alternative development ratios, or to satisfy a new population that has different preferences.
All right. There's a point in the land development use where we're talking about in the agricultural resources section, we say we're only gonna support one dwelling per 35 acres in agricultural lands, okay, around the city of Delavan. And then in the land use section, we make a special provision for 5-acre sites to be divided from 35-acre parcels. And my question is this inconsistency only because of only applied to the town of Delavan agreement references? Because in the town of Delavan agreement, we have a reference that says we will allow them in extraterritorial to divide 35s into 5-acre houses.
I do not know
Okay.
what's in the agreement, but I would imagine, or I didn't personally make that change to this document, so that appeared either in the previous document or in the 2017 change amended. So I don't know for sure.
There's
Was Mike?
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in on that one. I think that's a really good question, Kevin. We may not need to keep it in there because I believe that language existed for the town of Delavan development we were comfortable with, that at the time was within our extraterritorial area. Now that area is all outside of our extraterritorial area and outside the boundaries of our planning area. So Ben and I ought to revisit that.
There's a section under the single-family sewer zoning rule. I think it's .5, and it says consider changing the zoning for multiple family to single family, where it's RM8 or whatever those zoning instead of consider, shouldn't we say we want it changed?
That was a policy question that I was going to ask the larger group. That's something that was clearly added in the last iteration of the plan. I don't know what progress has been made on it, and it was a potential policy to either continue or revise at this point. So that was a larger question I wanted to ask the group, yes.
So in like draft 2, we should discuss whether or not we want to continue the process or solidify the process of changing the duplex and multiple units that are in single family to just single family.
We could have it right now too. I think we don't have to come to a conclusion right now, but the question is, do we want to rezone property that's in a multifamily zoning district right now, downzone it to a single family because it's in a single family use. So that would remove the right.
Depending on your perspective, it might be an upzone.
No, technically state defines a downzone as removing a right, and that's what you're doing, so. The removing of the ability to convert that property into a multifamily is a downzone, and so that would be a policy decision that would need to be made by the council and the plan commission in terms of feeling comfortable in going about that approach. And it's potentially a loss of the most affordable housing in the community, but it's also a potential gain in terms of property maintenance standards, because homeowner occupied units are traditionally better kept. That's not to say that that's applicable for every situation, but that's a generalization, yeah. So we can continue to carry this provision over if this is something that you guys are comfortable with or would like to pursue at some point. If you'd like to scale back, we could also do that and remove this clause, because I don't know how much has happened since 2009 when this was last written in terms of this policy being implemented.
Well, my question was, it was considered progress at that time, and so And we haven't had population growth. We haven't had people who've said that we have a housing problem because we can't convert single family to multifamily. We've learned over the last decade that we continue to have a problem with maintenance of multi-unit former single-family homes and have had to put in place substantial investment on the part of the city to ensure landlord compliance in structures like that. So I don't know what the policy basis would be for changing it. That's my position.
Mike, did you have something?
Well, I just wanted to point out that if you want to keep the option open to downzone, then it needs to be in the plan. This would be one of those instances where the consistency requirement comes in. And Kevin, I think you make good points. What I would suggest is we talk to staff about the areas which are north and mostly south, immediately south of the downtown. And are things so scattered that a downzoning would end up being a bunch of spot zones? Or are there broader patterns that might inform a downzoning effort? Remember that under the statutes now, if the city undertakes a downzoning, which would be, after the comp plan is adopted, you need a supermajority vote of the common council under state law now to do a downsell.
Well, it generally decides everything unanimously.
Not necessarily.
When we adopted the comprehensive, or the zoning code in the late 1990s, we did a lot of downzoning, but we didn't do all that was possible. And we need to talk with staff about to what extent are there still remaining issues with property maintenance and other things that cause expenses and for the city and may make it the neighborhood a less desirable place to live in.
Well, just to close, I mean, we identify in this document that one of the advantages of Delavan is the nature of its 80-year-old plus historic homes, right? And so maintenance of them, I think you could probably do a statistical correlation that maintenance by owners occupied as opposed to divided duplexes unoccupied would help with that overall goal. In the transportation section, I have a couple of questions. One is, there was a plan that said extend Geneva Street across Springs Park, and I didn't know whether that was a reading test or whether there actually was a Golden Gate Bridge plan at any point.
That one actually comes from me. That was in the 1962 City Master Plan. I was just carrying it forward. That's, right. That's one of the reasons, if you look at West Geneva Street up by Our Redeemer, that's why that road is so wide, is because of that. That was designed off the 1962 Master Plan. That was the city's long-term goal, was to have a third crossing of the creek.
So,
Mike wants to comment.
Mark, that plan dates back before Ben's parents were born.
so my question is whether it should continue. And then I have a question. We in the natural resources section, or one of the sections, talk about the dams and that there's no need to do anything on the Lake Comus Dam, which is the dam gate and stuff like that. And the dam gate, the gate bridge, trail access across there, all of that is absent completely from this. Is there any, ever, I mean, is there an interest in developing that dam road crossing of that dam gate to widen it and to extend the beautiful park trail systems and build a fishing platform or something like that there? And should it be included in the plan? That's one of the questions.
Because then that would be consistent in terms of our open space plan, it's trying to get the trail all the way through. I think it's consistent with our downtown plan, because that's supposed to be tying the whole walkway around the lake. So I think that is.
My other comment, in the utility section, not to beat a dead horse, but I think we need to increase, we need to develop a technological infrastructure section in that area, and it needs to be larger than priority number 20 in the policy section. In the housing section, one of the things we haven't talked about tonight was item number 16 of actions, which was accessory dwellings and in-house suites. What's the justification for those? Because, I mean, that's a substantial change. In fact, this board has prevented bathrooms in large garages just because we're nervous that someone might have an accessory dwelling. And so that would be a big change across time.
So, and we can, we've talked about this in terms of trying to, where to have over-occupied us, trying to give people opportunities to stay in their homes and be able to keep those homes, and when they're, and it becomes hard to do that sometimes. So I think it was really an idea of how do you make, allow those homes to, as people age, or if you have someone staying, you know, a family member, or now where you could create those opportunities in the home. But a lot of what it's looking at is it may make it easier for people to maintain those homes where they might otherwise not. And that's why we tied it to that the owner, it has to be, the property would have to be owner occupied.
Or owner family member, right? But, and, so I think in terms of that section, it makes great sense, but I think we need to really talk about what the details of that would be. Because we've, I think, before been concerned about whether accessory structures turn into unapproved second rentals and stuff like that. In the economic development section, is this document the place where there should be a more thorough discussion of the objectives and justification of TIF number 6? It's just a passing, it's basically a passing reference. And I'm not asking because I think it should. I'm just asking, is this document a place where it should be discussed more thoroughly?
Well, there's a separate TIF plan that's associated with a TIF when it's established, so
Right.
we don't want to get into that level of detail, but I guess we could draw more conclusions, or basically tie some of the components of why we would need that TIF together. I don't think that's flushed out, if that's what you're getting at, but.
And in the economic development section, I'm going to say it one more time. I think we should have a targeted discussion on the economic development section when we discuss draft 2. Because I think we should really ask the question of how much emphasis and resource should be placed on attracting businesses to Delavan when, in quotes from the plan, which I've said already, 81% of the people who work in Delavan live outside the city, while conversely 76% of the people who live in Delavan work outside the city. And so we're
Maybe those ones that work outside the city.
and so I think
I
think what we have to talk about is what are the benefits of industrial development beyond jobs for city residents. And then I have one question on intergovernmental, and that is, do we because we have the intergovernmental agreement with Town of Delavan, do we have any responsibility? I think we, in the original Smart Growth, Mike, had a meeting with the Town of Delavan at some point. Do we have to have any conversations with the Town of Delavan about this document?
There's no statutory requirement for intergovernmental meetings, and in fact, you don't have to send the town a copy of the plan until after it's adopted, which certainly doesn't engender any intergovernmental communications. Our practice, at minimum, is to send a draft copy of the plan to the school district, the towns, the county, all of the required agencies that ultimately would get an adopted copy of it. Ben, my recollection is we didn't budget for any of those meetings. Is that correct?
That's correct. We did have budget for our normal mailings of those notifications, but outside of that, no.
Which draft would that be? The final draft?
That would be before the public hearing. Yes.
All right.
Although like with the town of Delavan, like a lot, right now, we've not really changed anything that would be inconsistent with the boundary agreement, because, right, basically how that is, it's, you know, either each kind of controls their own, and I don't think not really doing anything that would be inconsistent with what we agreed to.
Any other comments from the Plan Commission as far as areas that you noticed in the plan that we have not talked about yet tonight? Okay. I think we will come back with a revised version based on what we heard tonight. We will have a more in-depth conversation at the July meeting about some of those components that we talked about and policy questions overall. I think we'll have the residential conversation again, just to see where we all land on that. But I think if you guys want to continue to look through this document, we will get you draft 2 ahead of time, hopefully a little more ahead of time than this time. And so you'll have an opportunity to review that, and then we will showcase the kind of changes that we made based on this meeting.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Mike.
Good to see you all.
We'll move on to item number 7, which is an update on building and zoning related materials. 7.1 is review the building inspector's report. T?
Did you guys have any specific questions, or tell you the Brasswork Apartments, they're actually getting their occupancy this week, and I think June 19th, people are going to be starting to move in there. And
Do you know how many?
I
Out of how many apartments they have, do you know?
I think that I think that they might be 100% full. If they're not 100%, they're pretty close to being full. I think they're still working on somebody for the commercial building part of it. But otherwise, from what I've heard, and I kind of just talk to the general contractor all the time, but it sounds like they have like a waiting list of people there, so they're pretty excited about it. And as far as I know, Quick Trip is they're on schedule for their occupancy. They're trying to open up July 1st. Unless something crazy happens, they're on schedule. And this week, also the CubeSmart, Jennifer O'Neill and myself are going to be going over there, I believe, on Thursday for a final occupancy. Those are kind of the big main commercial ones that we have, and then guys have any questions on any?
I do have a question as a result of a previous agenda item. It really concerned me that that fence issue came about as a result of the contractor. By my understanding, they did the work, they got paid, they pulled the permit, but as far as they were concerned, they're done. And the owner was left holding the bag. So I know that in commercial, occupancy isn't given until the final building inspection is done. I'd like to see something developed where if a third party is pulling a permit for any purpose, that third party is not allowed to get off the hook. The homeowner is instructed that don't pay them until this is signed off by the building inspector. Very similar to that. So my question is, how do we put something like that into practice? I know we can identify if a third party is pulling a permit. And I still find value in that because a homeowner is going to take the expertise of an installer to do an installation in any regard. And if the installer is providing the service of pulling the permit, that shouldn't be impacted. But I don't want predatory practices used against our constituents. So is that something that we would do here, or we would provide as an ordinance, or a policy shift? How would you see that implemented?
I guess I'd have to refer to you, Denise, on for policy.
Yeah, I want to talk to the attorney. The one, and we can look at some options, the one concern with me is that you may have the contractors now saying, go get your permit, when there are some, and, yeah.
It may be.
Yeah, which may be okay, because then we at least know that the owner is aware of the conditions, and so maybe that works okay too. You know, so we can look at that and see,
At that point, we can even inform the owner, if you like, we will come out and make sure so that you do not have this come up. If they don't install it according to the permit, according to the regulations, you would be on the hook for replacing it, for fixing it. To me, this is a matter of identifying the accountability and not just passing the buck onto a homeowner who doesn't know or claims they don't know as a way to skirt this.
and I'm going to talk to the attorney too, is in terms of the title company, you know, what obligations do they have to notify, you know? And now I know our documents, we just sold the one lot, and the documents between both parties actually had it was attached, the real estate form that we gave them, you know, so I don't know if that's normal. So we will check that too, as to whether or not, how that is part of the process. But we were given in the documents, the copies of the final documents, that you did see how the city, in this case was us, but how the city responded in terms of no special assessments, et cetera. And so I think we'll talk to the title companies too, and see is that document normally transmitted to the property too. And it might be, may be different with different title companies. But if they don't transmit it and a property owner finds themselves, I don't know if their title insurance, if they ever review those there too.
I've sold vacant property and gotten copies of my own plans from the title company as part of the closing.
So it's just good for us to know, because
Sorry. Any other, Kevin, did you have a question?
I've just, on 307, 309 East Walworth, we contend in this document that, the property remains in non-compliance with the fire inspector's orders due to warehousing of second-hand items, et cetera. They're open.
Mm-hmm.
A portion of the store is, yes.
They're open on one side.
And so the
and there is litigation going on with it. So
Right, I understand, because it says there's litigation for summary judgment, but if it's non-compliant, can't the fire, department say you can't be open?
It's both, the fire is really too much information, too much in there. I think the zoning, the storage is actually a zoning issue, so you probably should correct that.
It's, I would say that it's more of a zoning issue, but on the side where it is a fire issue, it's more for egress, and so it's, that section's closed. So it's a combination of zoning and fire, but the part that's closed is, for the fire part, the public's not allowed on the one side.
Doors open. I would ask the fire guy to go measure the aisle widths on the side that is approved too.
Yeah, we've been trying to
I know.
work with them, and, yeah.
Any other questions, comments regarding the building inspector's report? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn. Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.